Welcome back to another edition of this Saturday to Sunday football podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. The NFL draft is a little over 1 week away. We've been covering things wire to wire here at Saturday to Sunday, and we are so excited. The return, one of our longtime, probably at the top of the standings for guest appearances here, back on the pod. It is Sigmund Bloom of Football Guys. Sig, welcome back to the Saturday to Sunday football podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's good to be back. It's me or Matt Waldman up there on the leaderboards. But it's a great tradition, and I just hope that New Orleans internet, I'm working on it, folks, allows me to get through a wonderful hour with you that I always look forward to, Paul. And this is, we were talking a little bit about baseball and coaching kid baseball. Baseball season just got underway, and spring represents new beginnings. Spring represents unlimited possibilities, rebirth. And I think that that's what we love about the draft. That's why it's neat that the draft is in April, which is about as far on the football calendar away from, it's like on the other side of the calendar of the season, but it's its own season. We talk about this a lot, Paul, that it's a combatant. The organizations are at competition right now, but it's the front offices, it's the coaches, it's the scouts, and your organization is moving up or moving down. We may not see for years whether it was moving up or moving down, but some important stuff is going to go down.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time of the year, and you're trying to read the tea leaves and listen to all the stuff that's out there, but it's also smokescreen season, and I think right at the top, let's start with the quarterbacks, because I think the narrative around the quarterback situation is very interesting, as it always is, in a class that, all intents and purposes, obviously compared to last year, it is nowhere at that class. It has been deemed a weaker class with a couple intriguing prospects, one at the top in Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, and then other guys in the mix. But now, like all this buzz over the last 2 weeks about Jackson Dart definitely going in round one, Jalen Milroe being invited to the NFL draft, and the buzz. You've seen his name popping up on round one mocks. I think it was yesterday there was a report, I think from Rich Samini, who covers the Jets, that the Jets are really interested in Tyler Shook, whether they think about him in the first round or move it into the first round or early top of the second. So maybe just the big view of this quarterback class. Are we really going to get as many as we possibly think in the top 40 picks or so? Or is it again going to be one of those years that we hear a lot of buzz, and then once draft night happens and the draft unfolds, it turns more into the Matt Corral, the Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis year, where all of a sudden these guys are sitting there mid to late round 3. So maybe just a little bit about the quarterback picture, who you kind of expect to go in round 1. Do you think Shedeur Sanders is warranted of round 1? A little bit about Cam Ward and just the big guys.
Yeah, there's a lot there. It's a real fascinating class. It might not be a stellar class, a spectacular class after last year's 6 in the top 12, who, by the way, all seem like they deserve to go in the top 12 1 year in. You look at these 6 guys. We'll see about J.J. McCarthy, but 5 out of the 6 showed that, hey,
I may have lost Sig here. Let's see if he comes back in. I know he was talking about having some internet problems. He was talking about the quarterback class last year, 6 guys warranted going in the first round, those top 12 picks. This year, it's going to be interesting because, like I was saying, Shedeur Sanders going to be going somewhere in round 1. I don't think he's going to slide all the way out of round 1, but where? It doesn't sound like it's going to be the Giants at 3. It doesn't sound like it's going to be New Orleans at 9 is a possibility, but not something that's definitive. How far does he slide? Does he slide to the Pittsburgh pick at 21? Does another team come back in, whether it's Cleveland or New York, from the top of the second and trading into the first round to get back at him? So I think the Shedeur Sanders aspect is fascinating. Does Jackson Dart go ahead of Sanders? There's been some buzz with people putting that in their mock drafts, having Jackson Dart going at pick 9. And then you have the Jalen Milroe factor. A lot of buzz surrounding Jalen Milroe right now in terms of how high he could go in the first round. If he goes in the first round or the top of the second round, going to be invited to the draft. Usually when a player is invited to the draft, there's a lot of buzz. The NFL does not want players hanging out in the green room for that long. So it'll be interesting if they know a little bit more than we're trying to interpret. You see Milroe's name popping up in a lot of these round one mock drafts right now. I think that's partially because people are reading the tea leaves and seeing that the league invited him there, and they don't want a situation where he falls to day two and in the NFL draft. They like try to avoid that. So do they have some additional intel that lets them know that a team is going to take Milroe in round one? Maybe it's the Steelers at 21. Maybe a team trading up that they've from their sources think that a team is going to be willing to do that at the top of round one. So it makes it a really fascinating quarterback class. Hopefully we get Sig back on here. I know he said he was battling some internet issues out there in New Orleans. So we were talking about the quarterbacks a little bit here. So I'll kind of stall a little bit to see if we can get him back in the mix here. But it's really interesting. And then the latest report yesterday about the Jets' interest in Tyler Shough, I found really interesting because I don't think they would ever consider it at 7. I mean, that would literally be a more stunning turn of events than the Michael Penix curveball last year. At least we had heard Michael Penix potentially in the mix to be round one. We thought maybe it was going to be the early teens, not so much the top 10. But I don't see that scenario for the Jets. But I do think that if the interest in what came out yesterday is real, we could see them at the top of the second, or we could see them potentially trading back into round one to look at a player like Tyler Shough. It'll be interesting because I thought they were going to be all in on giving Justin Fields a real shot. But if they take Tyler Shough, whether it's a trade back into round one or at the top of the second round, it's going to be hard for them to keep the leash. The leash that Fields has is going to definitely be, shrinking to the point where how quickly would the Jets think about moving on if they make that investment in Tyler Shough at the top of the second round there? So I think that's going to be an interesting narrative that I haven't really considered the Jets in the Shedeur Sanders interest in at pick 6 or sorry, pick 7. Obviously Vegas picking at 6. I don't think they're in. So I think the quarterback situation is fascinating for that regard, because we are looking at a scenario here where we thought there was going to be a lot of interest in the top 10, but now it seems like Cleveland's passing. And if Cleveland passes and the Giants pass and Vegas, who I think is going to be in on Ashton Genty, if they pass, now we're talking about the Saints, obviously issues coming up with Jackson Dart and whether or not he's going to be available now in terms of that. So it's going to be really fascinating to kind of watch this quarterback landscape and kind of follow it on round one, just because I don't think I don't think we expected this many to maybe be in the mix to go in the top 40. I think Milroe and Shough, people looked at it maybe somewhere on day 2. Maybe Dart was going to be the top of the second. But as this process now has continued out, we have seen a scenario here where there seems to be a lot of interest in those 5 quarterbacks. We know Ward's going to Tennessee. We don't know where Sanders is going to end up. But then you have Milroe, you have Dart, and now you have Tyler Shough in the mix. We could see a scenario where 5 quarterbacks go in that top 40 or so picks, and then that's going to push some other players down the board. There's going to be tremendous value for teams that are not in the quarterback market in terms of how to play this out in that regard. Trying to touch base here with Sig and see if we can get him back into the mix here. Hopefully we can, but I will continue to kind of just stall here a little bit, and hopefully we can get Sig's take on the quarterback situation. I think even after those 5 guys at the top, Kyle McCord's generating a lot of buzz right before coming on air. There was reports that Kyle McCord had a couple of visits scheduled. I could see these teams. The Giants were one of those teams. So like that makes me think the Giants aren't going to force the issue. If someone's not there at the top of the second or a trade back in the round 1, maybe they think about Kyle McCord somewhere in round 3. He's an interesting one. We've seen some connections with Will Howard and the Vegas Raiders with Chip Kelly there. So I think he's another guy that, whether it's round 3 or maybe early day 3, he's another guy in the mix. Then you have Quinn Ewers, obviously once very highly regarded prospect in terms of big time recruit. Looked like early this season where his trajectory was really on the rise before the injury. And then once he came back from injury, he wasn't able to kind of put it all together. But he's another intriguing guy that has traits and has tools. Does a team like the Rams somewhere on day 2 look at a guy like Ewers? Let's get him in the building, kind of develop him for down the line when Stafford maybe is ready to call it quits. Does a team like Vegas, even though they traded for Geno Smith somewhere on day 2 or round or early day 3, invest in a quarterback to kind of develop behind Geno Smith? You have Seahawks. The Sam Darnold contract is really just a 1-year deal. So is that a situation where the Seahawks are in the mix? And then obviously the other quarterback hungry teams, we know the Giants are in the mix. The Browns are in the mix. The Jets are in the mix. If they don't get a guy in the top 40 picks, are they pushing some of these other guys up, maybe taking them in round 3, early round 3, or end of round 3 or somewhere early in round 4? To that, we could have a scenario where when I was working on the draft projections notebook, which did go live late last night, I ended up having 7 quarterbacks in my first top 100 picks, because I do think we are going to see those guys potentially go in the top 100. I think Ward, Sanders, Dart, Milrow, Shook are locks. I think Ewers and McCord are very much likely to go in that round, top 100, those first 3 rounds. And then I do think Will Howard is in the mix. So it's possible we get 8. I ended up right now having 7 in my projections, but it still could be adjusted. And Will Howard could end up in that scenario as well. Still waiting on Sig, hoping that he can get back in here. Haven't heard from him. So let's give him a little bit more time here. And if unfortunately, if he can't get in right now, we'll look to reschedule. But hopefully he can get back in the mix here and rejoin the podcast, so we can hear his takes on the quarterback class and other aspects of the draft as well. After that, let's talk a little bit. And again, this was the next topic that I was going to bring Sig in on, was the running back conversation, because I do think the running back landscape of this draft class is also interesting for the fact that we're not used to seeing this many guys in the mix to go in the top 100 picks as well. I think right now I feel pretty comfortable saying Ashton Genty is going to go in the top 10. I think Omarion Hampton is going to go in round 1. I think it's probably going to be in the 20s. But I think the wild card at the running back position is TreVeyon Henderson. There's some people, Benjamin Albright, who has a lot of good sources. He said he put out a tweet last week that he would be surprised if TreVeyon Henderson is not a first round pick. Right now, I don't have TreVeyon Henderson in my projected top 32. I think there's a possibility. I think a team like the Commanders, he would make a lot of sense to. So I think that's a connection there where we possibly could see TreVeyon Henderson sneak into the latter part of round 1. And maybe there's even a surprise team picking earlier in round 1 that looks at Henderson as that really intriguing player who could offer a lot to their team, similar to what Devin Achane has offered to Miami. Maybe not at the level, but similar in terms of his role and fit of Jahmyr Gibbs that he's had in Detroit. So I do think TreVeyon Henderson is a guy that is gaining a lot of momentum, gaining a lot of steam. Could see him elevate to round 1. And if not round 1, I'd be very stunned if he's not off the board with the first 5 or 10 picks in round 2. And I think that adds, he's not going to be a guy who's going to get an immediate heavy workload. I just don't think that's in the cards for TreVeyon Henderson. I think they're going to kind of bring him along slowly in terms of his overall workload, but his touches could be high impact touches that I do think it's going to be really fascinating with TreVeyon Henderson as a guy who might be the 3rd running back in this round 1 scenario. And we got Sig back here. Sig, while I lost you there for a few minutes, I
Yeah.
kind of went through the quarterbacks, and we'll circle back to the
Thanks.
quarterbacks one
Yeah.
second because I do want
Yeah.
to hear your take. But right now, I was talking about the running backs, and we do have a scenario here where I think we have a real shot to have three in the first round. I was talking about Benjamin Albright was saying that he
Uh-huh.
would almost be surprised if Travion Henderson doesn't go round one, which we haven't seen a lot of that. But I was just kind of talking about Travion Henderson's
Sure.
skill
Sure.
set, how a team could look at him and view what he can bring in a Devin A. Chain to Jahmyr Gibbs like role. Maybe not at the explosiveness of Jahmyr Gibbs, but not that far behind it. So maybe some thoughts on
Sure.
Travion Henderson. Do you
Yep.
see a scenario where he could go in round one, and maybe just the running back? We have a star-studded running back class, so maybe just after Henderson, some thoughts on the running backs as a
Sure,
whole.
sure. Yeah, thanks for your patience, everybody. New Orleans Internet, I'm working on it. Anyway, well, we're not the least organized city in the United States. We're the most organized in the Caribbean. Okay, so Travion Henderson, I like Matt Waldman threw out a Jerick McKinnon comparison. I like that. I mean, let's remember before his knee injuries, he's a good back. Henderson has the pass pro to stay on the field on third down. He has a straight line. He's tough. He's not necessarily in every situation kind of running back. I mean, just in a usage kind of way, like Austin Eckler, that kind of running back, which certainly is worthy of a first rounder in terms of the contributions to the backfield and the application. And like you said, we could see three running backs in the first round. Which three? I mean, Marion Hampton would be out of North Carolina would be the most likely to be the third, along with Henderson. But teams are going to stack their board differently with this class. This is a really good class. It's a deep class. It's a class that has a lot of NFL contributors, and probably more than the number that will get drafted. So you're going to see a lot of teams dip in and add a player that can fill a specific role. I think even Hampton, Paul, I think even Hampton and Quinson Judkins, anything of those guys are not necessarily, they could be like David Montgomery types. And you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that's a model for the backfield now that teams are looking at. So Caleb Johnson is going to be most appealing to teams that run zone. They might have him higher than any of the other backs we talked about. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Daniel Jeremiah. Someone put out there that, hey, there's any number of six backs could go second or third when you look at teams' boards and how they're stacking the boards, and then where they're going to have enough conviction to take that running back, say in the top 50, instead of waiting until the third or fourth round when you can get pretty good discount versions of some of these guys, right? Like if you pass on Travion Henderson, you can get Brashard Smith. If you pass on Judkins or Hampton, you can get Damian Martinez, right? And some teams also might like, there's a whole bunch of guys I would call like try-hard guys who get the most out of what they have. Cam Sketabo probably the highest of that group, but there's Devin Neal and RJ Harvey, and different teams are going to zero in on different running backs. So it's going to be really fascinating to see, especially where these new regimes go. Teams like the Jets, the Jacksonville, like are these new coaches, new regimes going to hand pick a running back instead of looking at what they've inherited? So this is really, really fascinating class. We're going to learn a lot about what these teams value at running back. And I think, obviously, I'm always looking at the fantasy football angle, Paul. It's going to shake a lot of things up.
Yeah, and that was the question. One other running back question I wanted to ask you is if you were giving somebody advice here, how to handle maybe in a very active dynasty league, if somebody had offers on the table for running backs like Isaiah Pacheco in Kansas City, Tyrone Tracy, the Giants have been bringing in tons of running backs for
Right.
visits. The top end guys, Tyrone Tracy, who had a really strong rookie year. Situations like that, is it almost like if you can sell high on some of these running backs that look right now to be the lead guy on their team, but we know this draft is going to take place over, 10 days or so from now and change things up. How do you handle the running backs that are in place right now from a dynasty landscape? Is it just you kind of let it ride and wait it out? If you can get a decent offer right now, do you pull the trigger? Is it more individual basis in terms of the team and what you think of the player? I feel like there's a lot of ways team dynasty players can kind of look at this running back landscape with the draft and what's already established on depth charts and have questions on what to make of it. Chase Brown, another perfect example,
Sure.
right? Coming off a great year, but the Bengals might be very much in the running back mix very early in this draft, as early as round 2, which could dramatically alter his value. How would you give advice to somebody like that for dynasty?
Yeah, and I think you hit on the most important point, Paul, when you said, "What do you think about the player?" Just what do you think about the player? But from a just advice standpoint, I would say that for the running backs that people are looking at to be usurped or joined by some formidable competition, you've already seen the market. You're not going to get anything out of trying to trade Tyrone Tracy right now, trying to trade. DeAndre Swift, trying to trade Ramondre Stevenson, trying to trade. There's a lot of running backs. You even mentioned Chase Brown. I think the market is starting to, with Judkins and Henderson both visiting Cincinnati. I think the market is starting to allow for, well, yeah, Chase Brown as good as he did. It's not just going to be Samaje P. Ryan joining him, and it could be, like you said, a second day pick, a formidable running back. So you're not going to. I mean, you say sell high, Paul, but you're really only selling high in a way that's going to be desirable is if the player at the bottom just drops out of the player. So if you don't believe in the player anyway, if you would be looking to sell high, even with a much less stellar running back class, then sell high. But if you like Tyrone Tracy, if you think that the David Johnson comparisons weren't crazy, if you think that, hey, DeAndre Swift, we'll leave Swift aside because he's probably going to be joined by JT. I think that's like the odds-on favorite of where he's going to go, and that's a separate one. But I do think that if you are going to sell high, if you are looking to get out of running backs before this draft, I would say it's the running backs that not everybody has being joined by somebody. I think Devin Achane is a really good example where, what do they think of Jalen Wright? They liked Raheem Mostert. He was a trusted running back. How high could they go? They could take a running back in the second or third day without a doubt. And so I think if you're looking to get out and sell high, you would do it for a running back that the market isn't already assuming is going to get competition. But some of these guys, Paul, are going to end up being good holds because maybe the Giants, you're right, the Giants bring in a ton of running backs, but maybe they don't take one until the 6th round. You see some of these other running backs, hey, maybe JT goes to Vegas and Chicago doesn't end up taking a running back until the 3rd or 4th round. And DeAndre Swift is still set to lead a backfield in touches that's going to be a much better running game based on all the moves they made in Ben Johnson there. So I think that most likely best move is to hold. And I think there's a few sell highs, but it has to be ones where the market isn't looking already for those running backs to get competition.
Yeah, and I do think we also have to look at it. Like last year, everybody thought James Conner's value was going to nosedive with the selection of Trey Benson, or early in round 3, and that was the exact opposite, right? So there are scenarios where guys get taken and don't immediately like torpedo the value of the guy who's already there. And I think sometimes people get very excited for the new shiny toy, but the guy, the trusted veteran who's still a really good player, we've seen that come to fruition. And last year's example is the perfect one with James Conner and Trey Benson. And I do think some of that is going to play itself out naturally in this draft class as well. Let's transition back to the quarterbacks.
Sure.
While I lost you there for a little
bit. I have an internet connection.
I was just talking about how we may get as many as like 5 now in like the top 40. I don't,
right.
if you believe what's out there, maybe it's smokescreen, maybe it's not. So I know you started to talk before we lost you a little bit about the quarterbacks. So maybe just circle back to that. Thoughts on Sanders, Ward. Is Milroe worth an investment? I know your Steelers are dabbling around in a lot of quarterbacks. It's, something that they might pull the trigger at 21. So a little quarterback talk.
Yeah. And, Ward's pretty straightforward. Before I dropped out, I think I've heard Kyler Murray comparisons, maybe Kyler Murray, but a better passer. I think that's fair. And I think you understand why he fits at number 1 for Tennessee. Will he get them to the promised land? I don't know, but he will give them a lot to work with at quarterback. Then you have a real variety here. Shedeur Sanders, I think that, you do have to I think the Dion factor is a positive. Okay, he knows how to prepare. He understands the bright lights. We talk about your Giants. If the Giants trade back into the 1st round for Shedeur Sanders, we know he can handle the spotlight, the magnifying glass of New York. So that's a good thing. And in fact, the quarterbacks he's compared to Geno Smith, Teddy Bridgewater, Andy Dalton, I think that's fair. And I know people might look at those guys and look at where they went in the draft, late 20s, 2nd round, but they're all quarterbacks that I think in this era would go in the first round, higher in the first round, because of the new CBA and the just bigger advantage every year of having a quarterback on a rookie contract. So I think that Shedeur Sanders, and he, Shedeur Sanders, all these quarterbacks, they want to attack with the pass. He's an aggressive-minded passer. In the short and intermediate game, in a West Coast kind of game, he can be hyper accurate at times. There are some things about his willingness to extend plays by retreating that he's going to have to iron out. But I like the way that he is always wanting to pass. It reminds me a lot of Geno Smith at West Virginia. You have Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart is your classic guy. Like, is he held up by the scheme? He's kind of robotic in his processing, and there's stuff to work with there. But you would want him as one of those quarterbacks in a McShanahan offense where the quarterback is basically controlled kind of by a joystick, by the play design and the coach's mind, the offensive coach's mind. And that's great. You need to take that in the first round. I don't know. That's stuff like Brock Purdy, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to find the things that activate and harvest the value of a good scheme and good play design, like an execution-based quarterback. I don't know if you need to take that in the first round. I'm kind of sad. I'll be sad if that's where the Steelers go. Still be better pick than Kenny Pickett. And then you mentioned Milroe. Milroe, I think the Jalen Hurts comparison, let's toss out the Jalen Hurts comparison, because much like Jalen Hurts, he has had to endure doubters already. Bill O'Brien telling him, you're not a quarterback. So he's already had to have belief in self. I think there's more to work with as a passer than we saw from Malik Willis, more to work with the pass than we saw from Anthony Richardson. Okay. Just if you just look at what he's put on tape, there's more to work with than those guys. And he's an outstanding weapon as a runner, like plus weapon as a runner. I think currently in the league, Lamar Jackson, this is probably the only guy I would say is a more dangerous runner than Jalen Milroe is, a more natural runner than Jalen Milroe is. And Milroe is showing growth. Again, Jalen Hurts, growth. The arrow is pointing up, and he's good in the deep passing game. And he's good against pressure. Just you look at the metrics. I want the Steelers to take Jalen Milroe. Cleveland is really interesting after they hired Tommy Rees, his offensive coordinator at Alabama. So, I think you could easily see all four of those guys go in the first round, appealing to different organizations, looking for different things at quarterback. But I also think that the NFL likes Tyler Shuck. You see guys like Greg Cosell saying, okay, bit of a late bloomer, which doesn't matter as much at quarterback. Quinn Ewers, who probably should have stayed in school for another year, but you hear teams saying like, maybe there's something there. Kyle McCord, maybe there's something there. I think these guys have very limited upside, but the quarterback scouting is full of wishful thinking, and we're going to see that again this year. But I think Milroe is the one most likely to make dreams come true.
Yeah, and that's anybody who's been listening to me here Saturday Sunday this whole year. I've been in on Milroe. He's my third quarterback, and for me, it always comes down to if Jackson Dart becomes good. I still think he's probably like the 17th to 24th best starting quarterback in the National Football League. And that's fine. That's solid. There are teams who could desperately use that. For the Giants, that would be a significant upgrade on what they've had over the last X amount of years. But at the same time, when you're making that first round investment, I think you want to shoot for higher, or even early second here. I think you want to shoot for the higher upside. If Jalen Milroe puts it all together, his ceiling is probably as high as any quarterback, maybe right there with Cam Ward, if not even higher than Cam Ward, if he was to put it together. So that's what makes it so intriguing. If you're going to take your shot, I want to take my shot on a ceiling play that could maybe be a top 10 quarterback in the league and be a difference maker, not be a guy that we're saying, oh, if he does it, if he's a solid quarterback, are we having this conversation 3 or 4 years from now of do we have to find someone better to take us to the next spot, the next where we want to go as a franchise and competing for Super Bowls? And I think that's the question, people will wrestle with, which is why I think we're starting to see Milroe generate more buzz, because I think people are realizing he's got the work ethic. He's got that elite
right.
calling card right now with the athleticism. If he can put the passing together, and that could be a functional, it doesn't have to turn into this great
Yes.
pocket passer. He's got to be a functional pocket passer and accuracy. He's got to be functional, because if you combine that with the elite level athleticism, you're going to be talking about a difference maker. If Jalen Hurts was in a different system with less supporting cast, we probably wouldn't have seen Jalen Hurts develop into the player that he is right now. So there's layers to this, and I think Milroe is the guy you're kind of hoping, if he hits that developmental curve in the right situation, not rushed onto the field, then maybe there's a path for him to be another high caliber quarterback. So it's going to be a fun thing. Night one's going to be fun, because I think we could see as many as 4, maybe not. Maybe we just get 2 and everything's been a smokescreen. But I feel like it's going to be closer to 4 than closer to 2 right now, if I really had to guess, between the quarterback situation. Let's kind of spin this over to the pass catchers, and let's start with the tight ends, because I feel like the tight end class is an intriguing class. And I also wanted to kind of hit a more of a big picture question to start. Do we think the success of Brock Bowers last year, Sam Laporta, his rookie year, do we think that has started to turn the tides for NFL, and even you could tie it into fantasy as well, where we have higher expectations now for tight ends coming into the league and being really productive and part focal points of teams' offenses, as we've seen these guys have significant roles? It used to be like the Evan Ingram rookie year was an extreme outlier. And we don't usually get that, because tight end used to be a position that took a little bit longer. Was Brock Bowers just a special player? We saw Laporta take a little bit of a step back. Maybe it was just the great supporting cast around him. But do we think the tide in tight ends has started to shift, where their expectations are, if you're a high-level prospect, first round, top of the second, there are more expectations of immediate productivity in real life and in fantasy?
Yeah, I think that it's just Paul, we're so fickle, we're so prisoners of the moment, because I think going into last year, Kyle Pitts loomed over the tight end conversation as like, well, they can be overhyped. They're not necessarily going to deliver. And you mentioned Evan Ingram, and we can go back to that year that Evan Ingram and David Njoku and OJ Howard went in the first round, and Leo Pasiga, I think is his last name, who I've worked with at Football Guys and really enjoyed interacting on. It's brought up at the time. He's like, hey, tight ends, we're talking about a delayed impact. And that's probably the more sober take. Even Trey McBride, it took until halfway through year 2. That's the more reasonable take, because they're learning 2 positions. And it's just not necessarily instant. Even Evan Ingram, David Njoku, again, think about when the peak years started really kicking in for them. So I think that we're going to look back at Brock Bowers as a unicorn more than him as heralding that there's going to be a new era of tight ends who are impact players in year 1. Now, that being said, I don't think Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland are quite on the level of Brock Bowers. However, I think that they're both better prospects than, say, Dalton Kincaid. And Tyler Warren's going to be really interesting because of the possibility of him being Matt Batanti, my man, draft daddy, goes way back here in the draft world. He said something like a rich man's Taysom Hill. Again, for fantasy, I'm thinking about this. I'm like, oh, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. And Tyler Warren's a tough customer, not necessarily athletically gifted, but gets the most out of what he has, is willing to be one of those players that puts the offense on his shoulders as a receiver at times. So, you could see him go as high as at 7th or 8th, Jets, Carolina. I would be surprised if he gets past the Colts. And for fantasy, that would be a little bit of a heartbreak because of the Colts passing game. But, you're going to have contributions. Maybe a little overrated as a blocker, and maybe Colston Loveland is a little underrated as a blocker. I think one of the comparisons I've seen throughout here for Colston Loveland, Paul, is like Todd Heap. Todd Heap's a good player. Again, you're talking about Hall of Fame tight end, not necessarily, but I think he's probably more polished even than Kincaid was as a receiver, and has more to offer as a blocker. So you're going to see him go in the first round. Maybe a team like Denver. you're going to see him go no later than I think the early 20s. So these are both really good tight ends. But there's another larger story here, Paul, too, which is that this is not a great first round class. You have Abdul Carter and you have Travis Hunter and you have Cam Ward, and there's a big drop off. The poor Patriots, they really want Shedeur Sanders to go 2 or 3. Because the Patriots won in week 18 with Joe Milton, now Dallas Cowboy Joe Milton. They fell from the first pick to the 4th pick, which is just, Will Campbell's a nice player, or whoever they end up taking, but that's a big drop off. And I think there's a kind of a plateau of talent, Paul, with the exception of Ashton Jeanty. I mean, some teams might have him as like the 4th big time player, depending on what you think of running backs as a positional value position. So it's a pretty vast plateau from 5th pick or so into the 20s. And I think that's part of what's pushed Warren and Loveland off the board. But you have to adjust, and we'll talk about this with wide receivers too. You have to adjust where you might rate them closer to picks that went in the similar range in previous drafts. I think that there's just a general depression of value in this draft. And some of the teams picking like 4 to 10 are going to feel that.
Yeah, and I think the tight end situation is going to be really interesting, because I do think this is a scenario, especially for when people get to dynasty rookie drafts, that we could see 2 tight ends very much in the question of whether or not they should be taken before a single wide receiver. That is not something we've had too often. But, I was making a big super flex rookie big board on a recent episode, and I was talking about, I had Ted McMillan ahead and Travis Hunter, but we'll talk about Travis Hunter momentarily and the dilemma and the enigma that is for fantasy. But you can make the case that if Warren and Loveland hit, they have a good chance to be top 6, top 8 fantasy tight ends. Is that more valuable than like being a wide receiver too, which maybe we have a few guys who develop in the fantasy wide receiver twos, but maybe not a guy like what Malik Neighbors did. Like, we don't know that about the wide receiver class. So I do think we'll see with draft capital and landing spots. It's going to be a really interesting there, where I think people are legit, and especially coming off the year, like you just said, we're in the moment of Brock Bowers being an unbelievable fantasy asset. I could see some people selling themselves on the top of these tight ends ahead of any of the wide receivers in rookie drafts. So that's going to be really interesting. And before I pivot to the wide receivers, I did want to touch upon what you said there with New England. I do think it's fascinating. If this plays out, I forget I think it might have been the McAfee show that Darren Jeremiah was on. And he talked about, he kind of threw it out there, but Darren Jeremiah doesn't throw things out there just nilly-willy sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's got a little tidbit and he just puts enough out there for people to hear it, but not like make it sound like he has any, he knows it's going to happen. I don't know if I'd be stunned if we're sitting there night 1 of the draft and we hear Ashton Genty's name called for.
Yeah.
And I do think it's exactly what you just said. Extreme blue chip players, it probably ends after him. Right. And they can maybe get a really good tackle like Connor Lee or Josh Simmons at the top of the 2nd round. And is there such a gap between Will Campbell or Membu at 4 than there is to get one of these other guys at the top of the 2nd? Like, some people thought Josh Simmons might have been the best tackle in this class if he didn't get himself hurt. If he's going to be their top of the 2nd, or Connor Lee out of Oregon, they could say, you know what, let's take the blue chip player. We don't have the best infrastructure right now for Ashton Genty, but we can quickly start working our way towards that with our 2nd pick, maybe our 3rd round pick. They could start getting still quality interior offensive linemen in the latter portion of like round 3. That maybe we just take the blue chip player, especially if they have concerns about Membu or Campbell, about maybe they're not sold on them being tackles at the National Football League and they think they could be guards. I could see that being the curveball on draft night, where we have Ashton Genty being the surprise pick there at pick 4. And that would be a fascinating turn of events if we have Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, followed by Abdul Carter, and then Ashton Genty to round out the top 4 there. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that plays itself, and then tying that into the transition. I do think Loveland and Warren, they're going to be ahead of people's ranks in dynasty rookie drafts. I do think that is something that we're going to see more and more of after the draft, especially if Ted McMillan falls a little bit. I think if he goes to a team and like top 10, top 12, I think that'll sway. And I still think McMillan maybe warrants going ahead of some of these tight ends. But the next wave of wide receivers, Golden, Egbuka, those guys, I could see a path, Burden, where the tight ends are going ahead of them in dynasty rookie drafts. It looks like I lost Sig a little bit again. Let me make the transition here to wide receivers, and hopefully we can get him back on here for the last segment. The question that I was going to pose to Sig, and if he gets back on, I will pose it to him, is how to handle the Travis Hunter situation from a fantasy lens, because it is a very unique situation where we've never had a player where we've had to worry about his snaps being reduced because of playing on the other side and playing defense. Now, I do think we will get more insight into this based on the landing spot. If Cleveland comes out right after they draft him, I mean, I think it's going to be Cleveland, if not Cleveland, New York, but whatever team drafts him right there at the top of the draft, if they come right out and tell you the plan from day one and say, yeah, he's going to predominantly be wide receiver and maybe dabble on defense. Okay, I think that mitigates some of the immediate concerns. But in the hindsight, we also then are left wondering, well, what if he's good at wide receiver, but not as great as we thought? Is there a scenario where they start to play more on defense? And what if he's great on defense? Then do they cut it back his offensive snaps? I think that's a realistic concern to have with Travis Hunter that we don't have with any other player we've ever dealt with in this scenario. So it's one of those things that with Hunter, we might have, and then on the flip side, a team could draft them and not even remotely tell us their plan right on draft weekend. They might say, we're going to evaluate in both spots. We'll use rookie mini camp. We'll use training camp. We'll use the preseason to kind of get a feel and then alter and adjust as we go. That is a very realistic plan. We know teams don't like to share and divulge a lot of information. So there could easily be a scenario where Cleveland or New York drafts him and they don't even come right out with a preferred or clear plan initially. Then that really starts to throw in the mix what to do with Travis Hunter in rookie drafts. Do you put him over the quarterbacks in super flex leagues? Do you put him over Omarion Hampton or Travion Henderson or Tet McMillan when you're making your big board? I think those are realistic. Because to me, if we knew he was only playing wide receiver, you could make the case that based on wide receivers and longevity, he should even be ahead of Ashton Genty. I don't think anyone's going to put him ahead of Ashton Genty right now because there are legitimate questions that could change the narrative a little bit. So I do think it's a really fascinating scenario. We've never had it in Dynasty before where we've had to worry about a player losing snaps to the other side of the ball dramatically long term. Maybe they decide he's a better cornerback than wide receiver, and that's where they want to put him. So there's layers to this. And if I get Sig on, that was one question that I wanted to ask him, just it's a unique scenario that I think everybody in terms of their risk tolerance is going to have to make when you're picking at the top of your rookie drafts at pick 2, pick 3, and how far you want to stretch it out of whether or not how you want to handle that. I got Sig back. Sig, what I was talking about when I lost you again was the unique scenario for Dynasty and Fantasy that is Travis Hunter for so many reasons, because a team could come out, whether it's Cleveland or New York, and they immediately say he's predominantly a wide receiver, maybe sprinkle in on defense. But teams don't like divulging plans. That's one thing we know. They don't like being very forthright. So I think whatever team drafts them, they're probably going to say, we're going to evaluate it, and he's going to play on both. We'll see where the situation lies. We're going to use rookie minicamp and training camp and the preseason to kind of get a feel for it. And that makes Dynasty rookie drafts, which a lot of them do take place weeks right after the NFL draft, very interesting, because do players push him below Omarion Hampton, below Travion Henderson, some of the other running backs, Quinshon Judkins, Tet McMillan at the wide receiver position? Because if we knew he was just playing wide receiver only or predominantly, he probably is a lock to be the second pick. I think if he was only going to play wide receiver and we knew that, the case could even be made that he should be above Ashton Genty. I think some people might argue that, but this is such a unique scenario. If you were giving some people advice on the Travis Hunter situation for rookie drafts, what might you say to somebody in regards to him?
Take him number 2. I don't care where he lands. I don't care. I don't care. He's a generational football player. We throw that word around, Paul. He's a generational football player. He's a one of one football player. And yes, there's a risk that he's going to be like 80% of the time cornerback and only in on 15 snaps. And we can look in the past and whatever, Deion Sanders and Champ Bailey and Charles Woodson. Okay. He's a better wide receiver than Champ Bailey or Charles Woodson ever was. He would be the number one wide receiver in this class if he was just a wide receiver. Okay. And whatever a team's plan is, the Giants are an example where because of league neighbors, they might say like, well, we don't want to use, and that, they probably get more value out of him as a cornerback. Cleveland, it's more, tougher to gauge. Obviously, from a fantasy standpoint, if you're worried about this, New England's the ideal spot for him to land. I mean, the Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez, and they can just play him as a slot corner in, on obvious passing downs, and they need an alpha wide receiver. But I don't care. I don't care because he's an exceptional, amazing football player. And those are the guys that win fantasy leagues for you. Take him number 2. I don't care where he gets drafted. And part of the other side of this equation, Paul, is that Tet McMillan is, he's on the Mike Evans axis. He's not going to be Mike Evans. All right. He's on the Mike Evans axis. He's probably closer to like T. Higgins. And T. Higgins is a nice asset in fantasy leagues. T. Higgins isn't going to tilt your league in your favor, okay, in the way that Travis Hunter could. Okay, all these running backs, again, Travion Henderson, Amari Hampton. I think a super optimistic projection for Amari Hampton's like DeMarco Murray. Do you remember the years you had DeMarco Murray in your fantasy league? You're like, I'm winning championships because I have DeMarco Murray. No, there's 2 players in this draft for fantasy that could give you just an unfair advantage in your league. It's Genty and it's Hunter. Take him number 2.
Yeah, I'm right there with you when it comes to Travis Hunter because it goes back to our Milrow conversation. I'm willing to risk for the higher ceiling player, and Hunter is just so far. Like I can't remember a tier break from Travis Hunter to the other wide receivers in this class is as wide of a tier separation as I had since doing Saturday to Sunday. Like last year, Neighbors and Harrison were super tight for me. The year with Jalen Waddle and Jamar Chase and Devonta Smith. Yeah, I like Jamar Chase, but it wasn't like the gap between him and Smith and Waddle was catastrophic. To me, the tier break between Hunter to even Tet McMillan is wide. And I even think Tet McMillan on that spectrum you said, if he hits T. Higgins, I think that would be a great ceiling outcome. I'm more concerned, and I like him, but I'm more concerned he's on the Michael Pittman, Cortland Sutton spectrum and doesn't even make it to the T. Higgins, and let alone the Mike Evans. I just don't see that physicality at the catch point that Drake London and Mike Evans have, and even T. Higgins. So he's a good player. He's fluid for a man his size. But this wide receiver class, I was on the Harris Football podcast last week and I was talking wide receivers, and I was saying, like, we might not get anybody who the team runs. If a team runs an offense through a wide receiver in this draft class, not named Travis Hunter, it probably would be Tet McMillan, but very much how like the Colts offense ran through Michael Pittman or the Broncos offense ran through Cortland Sutton, not that true transcendent. You can go to any team in the league and be in the mix to be the guy who the offense run through. And that is such a change. This wide receiver class reminds me way more of like the Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith, Najigba, Zay Flowers class. I wasn't a Quentin Johnston guy, but I could see some people saying, oh, like Tet McMillan is like, I like Tet McMillan way more than Quentin Johnston. Like Tet's like the Quentin Johnston, but then you have like Golden and Igbuka who are like the Jordan Addison and the Zay Flowers. So any thoughts on the rest of these wide receivers? Do you see it similarly to me in terms of like the big picture?
Yeah, and I think what you have here is, let's start with Tet McMillan, and I think you summed him up really well. I think invoking Cortland Sutton, I think, is a good name. Michael Pittman is a good name to evoke when you think about fantasy ceilings. And the reality is, okay, we have Travis Hunter. We talked about Travis Hunter. There's like 6 or 7 guys who can end up being the most valuable receiver in this class that's not Travis Hunter. Luther Burden, who is on that Debo Samuel axis. Egbuka who is, not quite Amon-Ra St. Brown, just a rugged, reliable slot receiver who has some other applications. You mentioned Matthew Golden. That's your classic fastest receiver in the draft. He doesn't even play like the fastest receiver in the draft. And I know that Isaiah Bond, and there's some obviously character questions hanging over him now with the sexual assault charge. Or some sort of sexual. I'm sorry, don't quote me on that, but he's in some legal troubles. And already there were murmurs about football character and about character before that happened. But Bond and Golden don't look that different at all when you watch them, as far as prospects, just the prospects. I think that Jack Besh is ideal McShanahan power slot. I mean, he's just some teams are going to love him, absolutely love him, and he's a really high floor, reliable prospect. So I think we could get the Iowa State guys, Noel and Higgins. Higgins could be, Paul Higgins could be better at McMillan's game than McMillan. We could watch Higgins and McMillan and say Higgins should have won. Like in the like it's not clear. And I think that part of what's going to mess with people in this class is the draft capital, right? Like if Genty goes 10 and Hampton goes 20, people are going to think they're in the same galaxy of talent. They're not. Okay. McMillan could go before Genty. He's not in the same galaxy of talent as Genty. And then you have wide receivers and running backs that are going to go in the second and third round that are similar. So you're going to really want to sort these guys as much by situation and how good these organizations are at developing talent. And I think people forget this. I'm going to make a little speech here as I'm long-winded because New Orleans Internet is actually working right now. I got it going. Thanks for your patience, everybody, by the way. I'm on it, and everyone's been – I feel the love out there that people put up with my New Orleans Internet Brocky C's here. You want to be in the second or third round of your rookie drafts. Unless you're just in love with a player, and I mean, look, if Travis – let me add a caveat. If Travis Hunter continues to fall to like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, okay, you want to be in that range and get Travis Hunter. All right. Like I'd say plan A, stick around at 5 or 6 and see if Travis Hunter falls, maybe even be willing to trade up to 3 or 4. And if you're after 5 or 6, see if you can trade up to 1, see if you can trade up to like about 5 if Hunter starts to fall. Otherwise, you're going to get out of the first round, and you're going to get out of the first round for the second and third round because of the plateau talent. And because people forget that when you see where these players land, not draft capital, because I think draft capital is going to be less meaningful this year. When you see where these players land, think about it like you're hiring this organization to develop the talent, right? Like who do you want entrusted with you getting the most value out of your dynasty rookie picks? You want Detroit, you want Philadelphia, you want San Francisco, and there are teams. San Francisco has a blind spot for running backs. I mean, I get it. Philadelphia doesn't do a great job with their third receiver, so I'm not saying like automatically take players from these organizations, but you're going to see running backs and wide receivers, Paul, falling to the second, third, fourth round, but in organizations that know how to identify talent that fits, know how to develop that talent, and get the most out of that talent. So I could easily see a scenario, Paul, where, if Jack Besh goes to Houston in the second round, he might be my number 2 wide receiver, depending on where these other guys land, because of Nick Caley coming from the McVay tree, Jacksonville and Liam Cohen, right? Liam Cohen, who told us after the draft, Bucky Irving, that guy runs the ball the way that I want my running backs to run the ball. So Liam Cohen, the new head coach in Jacksonville, if he takes a running back on like the third day, or like Bucky Irving went in the fourth round, or in the third round, then I'm going to move that running back way up after the success that Irving had because Cohen identified him and was willing to go to him. And I don't think Travis Etienne or Tank Bigsby, he has no loyalty to those guys. So I just think you have to be understanding this year that organization, fit, and ability to put a player in a position to succeed is more important than draft capital, because both at wide receiver and at running back, there's a deep class of potential contributors. There's not necessarily guys that are going to be true centerpieces of their offense. And the way you win in a draft like that is trading down, getting future draft capital, and getting players who might outproduce a lot of the players that went ahead of them.
Yeah, I think you make great points there because I just on that recent episode where I made my top 60 big board, and usually I never do it pre-draft. I have my film takes, I have my rankings based on film, but I usually hold off like the fantasy ranking for like a rookie big board till after. And I was like, you know what? This year I'm gonna put out an episode, share my top 60 big board, but use it as a catalyst to show that you got to be willing to be flexible. You got to be willing to be adjust. You can't just lock on to our pre-draft takes just solely based on film because it gets us in trouble sometimes. And this is going to be the perfect draft class where, like you said, there isn't this huge separation in talent who's going to go in the top 100. Like, yes, is draft capital going to matter a fifth round guy to a second round guy or early or late? Of course, because opportunity will linger. But when you're talking about like you said, Jack Bash, if he goes like 40th, is that really that different than the guy who's going to go 17th or 20th or something like that? There's not in that regard. And I think it's going to be, if they get in the right situation, they get the right opportunity. And like you said, you're buying basically stock in the teams to develop. I think that is a really interesting way to think about it. And a good point that a lot of people, I don't think sometimes analyze the big picture. And I'll say this, don't always worry about immediate depth charts. I feel like
Yeah.
people get way
Yes.
too locked in a dynasty league. Sure, running back, if you want a guy to develop play right away, maybe, but other positions, do not let the depth chart that is currently there impact many draft takes at all. Like the Zach Charbonnet one was a unique one a couple years ago because I had just drafted Kenneth Walker the year before. So like that, I understood people like hindering Charbonnet's stock in rookie drafts because of that, because they had someone. But more times than not, like I remember fighting the fight when like Roddy White was in Atlanta and they drafted and like Calvin Ridley. And I was like, are we really like caring about like one wide receiver on the depth chart? Like just there's enough to go around. Like even if Travis Hunter ended up in New York, I don't think it is that a concern because Malik Neighbors is there? No, they'll both do great once they figure out the quarterback situation.
Sure.
So I think people overanalyze things there. And I think that's a really good point of trying to buy stock in the teams that are investing them. But this is gonna be fun because I feel like so much is going to change on draft weekend in terms of our thoughts on these guys, and rookie drafts I think are going to be wild this year because I think, like you said, some people might just stick to draft capital. Some people might stick to pre-draft analysis, and then some people might blend things together like you're talking about. And I think that is going to make for a really intriguing dynasty rookie season based on, I know one of my favorite things to read is your post Bloom 100. I think it's going to, if we look at that compared to other things that are out there, you're going to see a lot of differences. And that's going to be the same way you're going to see rookie drafts take place this year.
Yeah.
It's going to be the wild, wild west in terms of people's interpretations.
And what that means is expect a player that you like more than you think will be there at your pick as you go through your draft, because diversity of boards is going to be good for people that trade down and people that are patient and put quantity over quality in terms of the picks that you have. So absolutely. I mean, again, I think the plan here is when in doubt, trade down and get more draft capital in the future, or get another pick this year, or move some of your picks up the board to like the third round and dry up that tier of good players. And we'll see. Because the other thing, like you mentioned, is that different people are going to go by different philosophies. But I think the one thing that always is going to rule is draft capital. And this is the year more than any other year the draft capital isn't as important. And then, again, we even saw it last year. You mentioned immediate opportunity. Look, players are going to create. Back in the day, we always used to say talent creates opportunity. And you're right, Paul, that we shouldn't be wedded to our film takes, because a lot of times players fail for reasons that you don't see on film, or there's the organizations, like look at Garrett Wilson right now. Like the organizations just don't get the most out of a player. But for the most part, if a guy can play, he's going to rise up. It's like the opposite of the Peter principle. He's going to rise up to the role that he deserves. So that's still going to be the final determiner in the end. And I think because of that, I think Scatabo is a really wonderful like Rorschach ink blot, Paul, of how you look at this stuff. And Josh Norris, who's doing great work over at Underdog, I think he really introduced this idea of thinking about it like where he wins. In NFL, you'll hear, don't tell me what he can't do. And Cam Scatabo he's built like a fire hydrant, and he doesn't have much in terms of phone booth quicks, and we think about the running back position and we think about phone booth quicks, and you're like, unless you're Derrick Henry or someone like that. And Derrick Henry is actually underrated when it comes to his lateral agility, considering what a behemoth he is. But the thing is, as long as the team that gets Cam Scatabo knows what he is and what he can do and what he can't do and deploys him in that way, you're looking at a guy that could have in the right offense if there's nobody in his way, because he's also a force in the passing game. You're looking at a guy who could immediately, again, a la Austin Eckler, could immediately be the second most valuable running back in this class. And not by a small margin either, because of his ability to affect the game in a bunch of ways, because of his ability, and this is another thing we underestimate, Paul, stamina. When he took over that game against Texas, overtime game, stamina. NFL coaches love that. NFL coaches love stamina at the running back position. So Scadbo is just one example. We talked about Milroe. Milroe might end up being one of the 5 most valuable fantasy players in this draft, easily. It looks like right now you can get him in the second round. Okay, tight end. We didn't get into the second tier tight ends. There's guys like Mason Taylor, Elijah Arroyo. Arroyo's got a high ceiling. Taylor's, and just Jason Taylor's son. I mean, he looks like the kind of player that can absolutely hit a tight end. So you can probably get tight ends in the second, third round this year. Terrence Ferguson's got a great athletic profile that we can project upside there too. There's a lot of players in this draft in the second and third round that could easily outproduce most of the players that go in the first round.
Yeah, so many great points there. I love the Mason Taylor is one of my guys in this draft class. I think he's going to be a much better production-wise NFL player than he was a college player. Listen, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, they had a lot of guys there that were feeding the ball. LSU did not make targeting the tight end a high priority there, but I think he's the complete package. I'm really into him in that. And I love that you brought up Cam Scatabo, because he's one of my running back guys that I'm so intrigued with. The Giants brought him in for a pre-draft visit. I would love the Giants in the third round. Give them a little bit of an identity on that on offense. If they take Abdul Carter at pick 3, Scatabo somewhere in like the late third round, all of a sudden you see a vision for this year's Giants team, right? Great pass rush, hopefully a good defense, moonshots from Wilson to Neighbors, and pound the rock with guys like, and Scatabo give them a little bit of that identity. Like, to me, as to try to get excited for this Giants year, that is a way that I could get excited about the Giants this year. Whether it materializes into X amount of wins, who knows? But it would at least create a little bit of an identity, something that has sorely been missing on both sides of the ball for my team that I watch. So I'm right there with you. I'm glad you brought up Taylor and Scatabo. Sig, always a pleasure doing this. I'm so glad we were able to get you on and talk this and kind of set the stage. I know when your cohort, Matt Wallman, I'm recording with him tomorrow night. Woo! Can't wait to pick his brain about Jalen Milroe and Savion Williams. I brought up Savion Williams on the Harris podcast the other day, and I hadn't known Matt's takes yet. And I was just kind of throwing him out as a wild card at the wide receiver position when Harris asked me for a few more names. And he's like, yeah, Matt was just on the pod and he has him in the running back ranks. So I'm looking forward to talking to Matt about Savion Williams. But I always enjoy having you on, always enjoy having Matt on. I'm looking forward. I can share with the audience. I'll be back on night 1 of the NFL draft with Sig and Matt for the first hour of coverage over on the Football Guys YouTube stream. So make sure you check that out. A lot going on. My draft projections notebook just launched this morning. So if you listen to the last episode, anybody, please get over there, purchase that. I'll put out a tweet about that as well today. But Sig, thank you so much for hopping on today. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, always a pleasure. And like you said, excited. Just get excited. Let's get excited. And if in Dynasty Fantasy Football, remember, we love the idea of like we're the GM, and this is your moment. You get and take players that make you excited to add to your team. Take players that you want your team to draft. Have fun. It's an escape. We all need it now. And I loved getting to escape with you, Paul, and everybody else in our great audience that encourages us and gives us the opportunity to serve them. It's a real privilege. And this is absolutely, for some of us, Paul, the most exciting part of the year, the most stimulating part of the year, more than the Super Bowl, more than week one, more than our fantasy drafts when we do our yearly leagues, because it's such an erudite, thoughtful part of the football calendar where every single football conversation intersects. So like for thoughtful people like yourself, like Saturday to Sunday has always been about very thoughtful, deliberate, detailed analysis. It's just like getting to swim in the ocean, and I'm really glad that we all get to do it together.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Best time of the year for sure. So, on behalf of SIG, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.